Welcome to the Book Faire podcast. My name is Anthony, and this week we have an interview with author and illustrator Angela Hsieh. A Tennessee lawsuit is trying to stop book bans, Overdrive appoints new ed tech position leader, and a study finds that book bans are leading to an increase in reading. Let's begin with an interview with author-illustrator Angela Hsieh. Angela, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And how are you doing today?
I'm doing as well as you can be in these times. I think right now I'm actually in Taiwan. I'm visiting my grandma and eating a lot.
Well, that's definitely good, and I hope that you're visiting on good terms and not...
Oh, yes.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. Angela, just to introduce yourself to the audience, can you tell us about yourself and about the book we'll be discussing today?
Yes, so I am Angela Hsieh. I'm an author and an illustrator. I have two books coming out, or one book out and one book coming out. The first one is a nonfiction STEM book for kids called Antarctica: The Melting Continent. I was the illustrator and the writer was Karen Romano-Young, and that one was a lot of fun to work on. And the one we'll be talking about today is my debut middle grade fantasy graphic novel, Lou and Ren's Guide to Geozoology. Quick summary of Lou and Ren's Guide to Geozoology, which I will be calling Geozoology because it's really a mouthful of a title. Lou dreams of being a great adventurer, just like her Ama, who is a world-renowned geozoologist. Ama has traveled far and wide, researching dreamy cloud jellies, enormous sunfish, and playful moss goats. There's nothing Lou loves more than reading Ama's letters about her quests, even if Ama writes in Saied, a language that Lou and her mom can barely read. But when Ama's letters suddenly stop, Lou becomes worried. So Lou teams up with old friend Ren to go on a journey to find her. As Lou and Ren follow in Ama's footsteps, Lou begins to discover the complex relationships between geofauna and between people. What stories has Ama never told her? And what's Ren hiding from her?
Ren is joining her on this adventure. Where is Ren coming from before they go on their journey?
So Ren is an old friend of Lou's. They met as children when both of their families lived in Lou's hometown, and Ren's family moved away. And one day, Lou just runs into Ren again, and Ren tells her that she is on an adventure and that she's traveling around Laren, which is the name of the land that they live in. And Lou takes this opportunity to grab a travel buddy and go on this adventure that she's always wanted to go on.
And while Lou is following in her grandmother's footsteps, trying to find out what happened to Ama, we find out that Ren is having an almost parallel story with her own family that is not quite the same as Lou's, right?
Yep. They are both trying to figure out their place in their own families and their place as their own people.
And it kind of gets into this idea of expectations where Lou wants to be like her grandmother. Ren is having some conflicts with her family and the expectations that she's experiencing. A lot of times with writing, authors will obviously put lived experiences in there. Are there any parallels between either of these two stories with your own situation growing up?
So I just had a chat with another Asian American graphic novelist about this and about family expectations. And I think the funny thing is that my parents are a little more like Lou's mom, Lou's mom is very happy to support her in what she wants to do. She still worries about her, but when Lou tells her that she wants to go on this adventure and then puts together this whole presentation about why you should let me go, her mom just kind of considers this for a moment and goes, okay, be safe. and so maybe I didn't run off into the world by myself when I was 12, but a lot of what I wanted to do in terms of my career and my interests, my parents were very supportive of it. At the same time, I saw that a lot of my friends were under a lot of pressure to follow more traditional paths. And it seemed really tough, honestly. And even though my own parents were supportive of my decisions, sometimes I also felt external pressure to do the more stable traditional thing. I had actually gone to school to be a doctor. I was interested in it and I thought I would be good at it. And somewhere in between, I changed my mind. But when I applied to colleges, I was applying as a pre-med. I went into a very competitive school as a biology major. But that also shows up in my work in its own way. So this is a very long way of saying yes and no. It does come from my own experience, and it comes from other people's experiences as well.
You mentioned external pressure, and while looking at geozoology, Lou sees that there are certain things that are going wrong with nature and how it's cohabitating with people and how there are some issues going on. And she has this innate sense of helping people and doing the right thing. And we kind of see her exploring that idea of doing the right thing and where that comes into a conflict as they get into a town where her Amma had previously been a part of.
Yes, I think this desire to help is something that a lot of people feel, and I think a lot of kids feel it even more strongly so. They see something and they want to fix it, and I've experienced that too. And I think one of the things that is part of getting older is realizing a lot of things are more complicated than you believe, and you can't really just press a button and solve everything or come up with the one solution and solve it all, but you'll still do your best. And sometimes you might mess up.
And that idea of growing up and seeing that there is no easy solution, was that an important aspect of Lou's story as you were writing this, to put in something in there where she learns that lesson?
Yes. It was one of the key pieces of when I was writing this, about how there aren't really easy answers, but you can still try and you can still make a difference. And I wanted it to reflect both in the world at large and in Lou and Ren's relationships with the people around them and their own families.
And you're reflecting not just Lou and the character and the world within geozoology, you're also reflecting the way that people interact and the way that communities interact. And that kind of leads me to, I wanted to talk a little bit about that this entire world is entirely a fantasy. There is no country known as Laren. So do you want to talk a little bit about the inspirations for the world within geozoology?
Yes. So the natural world is one of my main and most enduring inspirations, and I think it's particularly obvious in Lou and Ren's Guide to Geozoology. So the geofauna, the giant landscape creatures, they and their behavior have a basis in real life. So about halfway through the book, Lou and Ren come across these giant toads with hot springs in their mouths, and they're called buffoliths. And those are based on the Grand Chromatic Spring and the Morning Glory pools in Yellowstone. And also they're crossed with Darwin's frogs. So the hot springs in Yellowstone, they are beautiful. They have these amazing colors that are, I think the bacteria in the pools create these colors sort of as a side effect of the thing they do in there. And Darwin's frogs, I brought up, the male Darwin's frogs protect their eggs and young tadpoles by holding the eggs in their mouths. It's called mouth brooding. And when the young metamorphose into adult frogs, they hop out of their dad's mouth. And I think that's just some of the coolest things I've ever heard of. As a bit of an aside, there is an even wilder strategy that was used by the gastric brooding frog, which is unfortunately extinct. But what it would do, it would swallow its eggs and keep them in its stomach until they grew up. And then they would crawl out of the parent's mouth and go on their way. While that is super cool, I thought it would have taken too many pages to get into when it was just a small part of the story. So I ended up with the more accessible, if you will, version of a frog holding their young in their mouth. Yeah, so that's just one thing. I could keep going. Would you like me to go on about more of the animals?
I did want to ask, there are some really great geofauna in this book. I want to call out the moss goats. I think that they were just adorable. The name is escaping me. I just read this, but the infant version of those large hill creatures, those little moss-covered stones, are also really cute.
Oh, the cavies?
Cavioliths?
The caveoliths, yeah.
Caveoliths. It was on the tip of my tongue. Thank you. So, Angela, I just want to ask, are there any in geozoology that you would say you have a personal attachment to that may be your favorite?
I think the caveoliths, they're what started this whole thing. I had drawn for, I have a friend who really loves guinea pigs. And for her birthday, it was 8 years ago, I drew her an illustration of a giant guinea pig with a little guy hiking up its back. And that was the beginning of everything for this entire project, where I was like, oh yeah, what if these guinea pig mountains were a thing that people studied and traveled to, like the Grand Canyon? And that's where it all started.
There's another game I recently played that had a very similar creature, not saying that it's derivative in any way, but these were large elephant-like creatures that hibernate for multiple years at a time. And the indigenous tribes in this game would set up their camps around them as they slept. And when they woke up and migrated, it was a giant festival and a big event. And they would follow them to their new resting grounds. And that would be the tribal home for another 10 or 15 years. It's really interesting to see how we could take something as simple as nature and animals within our real world, and people who are more creatively minded than myself are able to expand these ideas into something that's so fascinating to think about when there are very real world examples that they're based off of.
What's the name of that game? It sounds like something that I would be so into.
It's so silly. It is the video game based off of it's not the tie-in, but it's a video game based off of the James Cameron Avatar movies. It is okay. Avatar: Frontiers of Pandora.
I'm gonna have to look into that.
So, unlike a lot of graphic novels, especially for younger audiences, typically there is a collaboration between author and illustrator. Would you like to talk a little bit about your personal process of creating geozoology as an author and illustrator?
Okay. Let's see, where do I start with that? I think for author-illustrators, everyone works differently. And what I do is that I start with the script. I need to get this thing down on paper as quickly as possible. And writing is the fastest way for me to do that. I'm not saying it's particularly good writing. It's just down on the paper. I know there are some people who draw their story, and I don't know how their brains work. It's amazing. I can't do that. I need to figure out how the story fits together with words first. And then after I'm done with the script, and I write it more like a movie script. I don't write panel by panel. I think that sort of gets me stuck if I try to lay everything out that in that sort of rigid way. And again, there are people who do that, and I don't get how their brains work, but hey, it works for them. So write it like a movie script, and then that goes through an editing process because I want to make sure that the bones of the story are good before I get to drawing. And the thing about me is that I draw very slowly, so I would like to do as little editing as possible in the drawing stage. And from there, I draw tiny little squares that are about 2 inches, not squares, rectangles that are about 2 inches high, and make sure the story flows and that the little stick figures are in the right places. Make sure your eye goes across the page in the way I want it to. After that is sketching, where I make sure those stick figures look like people and that other people can read what I just drew. And then it's coloring after that, which for me took the longest. I work in a lineless style, so I don't have a line art stage. So the coloring and the line art stage sort of went together, and I also decided to, in a fit of madness, to do this in a painterly style. So this book took a very long time, especially at that stage.
And as the thumbnailing, the panels, and the pages start coming together, are there any last-minute adjustments that happen to the script and story, or is everything fully set before the first color hits the page?
There were adjustments. Sometimes you write something, and then you put on the page, as a comic and you're like, wow, there's way too much text on this page. These kids love to talk, and that is part of their personality. They do love to chat, but you gotta cut down when you're doing it in a comic format. Otherwise, it would be a page of all speech bubbles, and you can't see what's going on. And plus, it gets cluttered and hard to understand once you hit a certain threshold of text on page. So the main beats of the story didn't change once I had written the script and sent it off for editing and gotten it back. But pieces of dialogue changed. Some scenes got moved or cut in the thumbnail stage because one of the issues with the way that I work with writing the script in a more movie script format instead of page by page is that I don't know how many pages I'll end up with. And so I like that freedom, but that freedom came at a cost, where when I initially thumbnailed this book from the script, it ended up being 320 pages, and we needed to get it down to about 240 because there was also front and back matter. So I had a very strict page limit that I completely blew past the first time. So the bulk of the visual editing happened at that stage.
There are those constraints, and those constraints exist in any medium, whether you're talking about duration for a movie or episode counts for TV. As you said, you blew past that word count. Did you find it difficult to make those changes to match those limitations with the page count?
A little bit. I think I wasn't expecting to have to cut that much. And a lot of what we did ended up being trying to fit more things on a page, essentially, without making it too busy. I think when I first realized that I wasn't going to get any more extra pages, I did ask if I would just get extra pages, and my editor told me, no, this is what you get. So when I first realized I had to start cutting down or consolidating, I got kind of annoyed, to be honest. I kept it to myself, but in my heart, I was like, why? Why do I have to do this? But once I sat with that feeling for a bit and was like, you know what? It's fine. You can do this. It got easier. And I just brought out the sticky notes and started slapping them on pages, on the thumbnails, and drawing over everything. And it got easier as I went.
And then, as probably related to the limits on the page count, may be coming from the fact that it's a middle grade graphic novel, were there any other considerations that you gave in the writing process considering the young audience?
Well, the funny answer to that is that I had to take out all the swear words. Not that I put them in the first place, but in my head. I think one of the things that I really stick to when I approach writing for a younger audience is that I don't want to talk down to them, but I also have to realize that I might want to simplify a couple of things, and especially because I'm working in fantasy and there's already so many new words that I'm expecting the audience to pick up that are not real words that they've ever encountered before. Hopefully, I struck a good balance between not talking down to the audience, but also not making it so complicated that they lose track of what's going on. As far as how exactly I did that, I'm not sure how to describe it. I think my editor did a lot of work in making this more accessible to a younger audience, and I'm just going to thank her for that.
I think that the specific section that made me think of this and why I bring it up is the flowers that were a different color because of the pH balance. And that's kind of one of the things that I was thinking about when you mentioned that this is fantasy and it's talking about a lot of things that are it's bringing in new words that are not real. They're made up for the story. And so when you start talking about something like a flower that changes based on the pH level, you put in this explanation for how it works. And it kind of felt like it was explaining, stop, I know that this sounds weird, but this is a real thing that happens.
Yeah, I remember learning that at about the same age that Lou and Ren are. I remember learning that and thinking it was so cool. And I wanted to bring that into this world, both because I thought it was a really clever way for the characters to have something very specific visually to follow in order to solve this mystery of what's going on, but also because I just love that plants do that.
I learned it an hour ago.
I was a very sciencey kid growing up, and there's a large part of me that wrote this for other sciencey kids. And I know not every kid, that's not every kid's thing, but they're out there. I was one of them. I hung out with a bunch of them. And, sometimes your target audience can't be too broad, right? I think it's a very common sentiment that authors for kids literature love to say is that I wrote it for a younger version of myself. And yeah, that's definitely in large part true for this book.
One of the things that I loved about this was just how wide the world came across, how big it was, and the diversity of geofauna within it. And I know that it's not up to you, but do you see further stories of Lu and Rin exploring this world in the future?
I think it's very open to that. I don't have concrete plans for that because, as I mentioned, I spent a very long time on this book and I'm ready to let it sit for a bit to just take a bit of a break from this world. But, should I be struck by inspiration, I'll consider returning. But at the moment, I don't have a sequel planned, or my next book won't be set in this universe. I actually specifically requested that I signed a two book deal with Harper. And for the second book, I requested that I wasn't bound to a sequel and that if it happened, it would happen. But I didn't want to be forced to write something my heart wasn't into. And, knowing myself, I like to give something a break if I've worked on it for a very long time. So I'm glad I made that call.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that input. Not enough authors are as forthcoming with the business side of things. And I appreciate giving that insight because there are millions of people who aspire to be authors, but there's not enough information readily available to what the actual business side of it is. So I appreciate that input. And Angela, just to close out this interview with the one final question that I ask to all authors. Angela, how do you see yourself and the work that you do as a writer? Or in your case, an author-illustrator?
So I've been thinking about this since you first sent this question to me, which I really appreciate, by the way, because you would have caught me off guard with that one. And even so, I kind of struggled to come up with my own way of saying my own answer to this question. So in the end, I decided to draw on the words of someone who has been in this game a lot longer than I have. So I keep coming back to the Kazuo Ishiguro quote that goes, "But in the end, stories are about one person saying to another, 'This is the way it feels to me. Can you understand what I'm saying? Does it feel this way to you?'" And that gets to the heart of what I'm trying to do. I think the most that I can hope for is that people who read my work feel a little less alone after reading it, and that they know that someone out there has felt the way that they have felt or feel. I think in many ways, the human experience can be profoundly isolating in many, many ways. And art is one of the ways that we can reach out to people, even the people we've never met before.
Thank you. That was an interview with author and illustrator Angela Hsieh. Her new book, Lu and Rin's Guide to Geozoology, releases on May 27th. You can find more information about Angela and her work at angelahh.com. Next, we'll be covering some new releases, but first, if you appreciate the work being done on the Book Faire podcast, you can show your support in a number of ways. The easiest is simply to like, favorite, or comment on the episode wherever you are currently listening. You can also go to patreon.com/thebookfair to find episodes posted early, along with links to sources used in the episode. Of course, the best way to show support for the podcast is by sharing it with a friend, an educator, or a young reader in your life. Now, on with the show. Let's look at some notable new releases, beginning with Tales from Beyond the Rainbow, 10 LGBTQ+ fairy tales, proudly reclaimed. Collected and adapted by Pete Jordi Wood. 10 captivating stories of adventure and resilience celebrating LGBTQ+ characters, published as an illustrated collection of queer classics for the first time. These are the fairy tales that history forgot or concealed. Tales in which gender is fluid and where queer stories can have a happy ending. From the humble sailor who finds his handsome prince to the transgender market girl who becomes a queen. From Europe to Asia via the African savannah, LGBTQ folklore researcher Peter Jordi Wood has combed through generations of history and adapted 10 unforgettable stories, each illustrated by an artist who shares heritage with the culture from which the stories were born. Representative of so many members of the community and brought to life with vibrant illustrations. Next, Darkness at Dreamer Mountain by Ryan Wolf. Is there a more exciting place to spend winter break than a haunted theme park? 13-year-old Teddy's uncle hosts a paranormal TV show called Shiver Search. He lets his nephew tag along with the crew for a special shoot. Dreamer Mountain is a long-abandoned amusement park with rust-covered rides and snow-steeped carnival stands. Yet, some say they hear sounds rising up from the site at night. When the crew enters, what they encounter proves more mind-melting than they ever expected. Teddy finds a force that seems to know his personal hopes and fears, something that can warp and transform space and time. Can he survive the cosmic power that has taken hold of Dreamer Mountain? Next, Candle Island by Laren Wolk. Lucretia Sanderson has a secret. Lucretia and her mother have come to tiny Candle Island, Maine to escape. Escape memories of the car accident that killed her father, and escape the journalists that hound her mother, a famous and reclusive artist. The rocky coast and ocean breeze are a welcome respite for Lucretia, who dedicates her summer days to painting, exploring the island, and caring for an orphaned osprey chick. But Candle Island has secrets of its own. A hidden room in her new house, a mysterious boy with a beautiful voice, and just like the strong tides that surround the shores, they will catch Lucretia in their wake. With an unforgettable New England setting and a complex web of relationships old and new, Candle Island is a beautiful story about art, loss, and the power of being true to your own voice. Next, The Real Wish by Yamile Saied Méndez. Ballet is Florencia del Lago's entire world. After years of hard work, she is chosen as Clara in the winter production of The Nutcracker. Not only is she the youngest dancer to receive such an honor, but also the first Latina. She's on track to be recruited by the best ballet companies. Unfortunately, she suffers a panic attack on opening night, on stage, in front of everyone. And then Selena, Florencia's best friend, steps right into the role to replace her. Just like that, Florencia's whole world falls apart. The ballet studio expels her, and her best friend turns on her, tormenting her on social media and in real life. But even though the one thing she was driven toward has come to an end, therapy and family support help Florencia open up to new experiences. She notices people at school she's never paid attention to before, and she even stumbles upon an Irish dance school and decides to give it a try. Can a new passion for Irish dance help Florencia find the joy of performing on the stage that she lost that fateful winter night? Next, we'll finish the episode with news and headlines, starting with the ACLU filing lawsuit against Rutherford County Board of Education. On April 16th, The American Civil Liberties Union, or ACLU of Tennessee, filed a lawsuit against the Rutherford County Board of Education over restricting more than 140 books from school libraries in Tennessee. The lawsuit is on behalf of Rutherford County families and PEN America and alleges that the bans are a violation of First Amendment rights. The school board began banning materials in the spring of 2024 through informal requests without any public meeting or vote. Members of the school board even indicated they were not reading the books that were being challenged, and instead relied on the Book Looks rating system created by people associated with Moms for Liberty. According to the filing, around 150 titles have been targeted by the board, though some members were confused about the actual policy for removing books. When a specialist was hired to make recommendations on the process, the board ignored their suggestions. Co-counsel Carrie Knox released a statement saying, quote, "Book bans are a clear violation of the First Amendment, effectively gagging authors and denying students the opportunity to read, debate, and learn from crucial, acclaimed, and historical works." As these baseless bans continued to escalate, we had no choice but to go to court to defend authors' free speech and students' freedom to learn. End quote. Next, a look at the Institute of Museum and Library Services a month after cuts. After a March executive order called for the elimination of the IMLS to the maximum extent consistent with applicable law, most of the 75 employees have been put on administrative leave with notice of a reduction in force to take place on May 4th. Currently, there are only 12 staff members still operating in the agency. Members of the furloughed staff have since filed in the State of Rhode Island versus Trump lawsuit, sharing what their experience has been at the agency since the order took place. 3 members spoke under the condition of anonymity with Publishers Weekly, confirming that there are only 12 people still working with IMLS and only 2 managing operations specific to library services. One of the 12 remaining members, Lisa Solemson, reportedly holds a library science degree, but not any credentials typically expected of a deputy director. Solemson is also reportedly married to Matthew H. Solemson, a federal judge appointed by Trump. Anonymous whistleblowers called this a blatant example of cronyism. In the lawsuit, one plaintiff said, quote, "At any given time, hundreds of awarded grants are at different phases in the grant cycle. Currently, of the 30 employees who process grants and handle financial aspects of grants, only 4 are currently not on administrative leave. In the month since Trump's executive order, only a single payment from IMLS, a disbursement of $67,000, was sent to Arizona State Library, Archives, and Public Records. There are further alleged breaches in federal processes and workers' rights regarding layoffs, though this is beyond the scope of this podcast, so if you'd like to read more, you can find links to source documents at patreon.com/thebookfair. Next, digital catalog provider Overdrive appoints first education advocate and edtech leader. In contrast to federal cuts in education, Overdrive, which provides digital content for libraries and schools, is expanding its leadership with the appointment of Renee Davenport to the new role of VP of Education. Davenport will be in charge of promoting and expanding digital access in schools and engagement with educators through Sora, Overdrive's reading app for K-12 students. Davenport comes from a background in education and most recently served as VP and General Manager of Education Partnerships at Learning Ally, an organization that makes content accessible to students with disabilities as well as learning differences. In a statement, Renee Davenport said, "My dream is that every student has the ability to read and make their own informed decisions. When students can read and comprehend, they can do anything. Our responsibility is to give them the tools to get there, and I'm proud to be doing that work at Overdrive." And finishing the episode, a new study finds that book bans lead to increased readership. Researchers at Carnegie Mellon and George Mason University have published a new study titled "Book Bans in American Libraries: Impact of Politics on Inclusive Content Consumption." It found that book bans increase the circulation of banned books by 12% compared to a control group. The effect also reaches states without book bans at a slightly lower rate of 11.2%. On average, children read banned books at a rate 19% higher than control titles after a book banning event. The increase in readership centers largely on books related to race, gender, and LGBTQ+ issues. Two things worth noting are, first, that book bans are largely not good for authors, as the controversy on titles can impact future publishing deals when a title is challenged or made controversial. Second, while book bans can lead to an increase in book sales, the circulation that largely comes from liberal areas through bookstores and online retailers, meaning that students, the intended target for book bans, are still unable to access materials that are pulled from shelves. This means that children in rural areas that do not have the means to purchase a book are more strongly affected by book bans, as libraries and schools are where these particular students get access to books. For these reasons, this is not a silver lining for book bans. A study that shows readership increasing doesn't account for people without means to purchase books. And so, fighting against book bans is still vital to ensure that materials are not gatekept. This will conclude another episode of the Book Faire podcast. If you wish to read more into stories found in this episode, you can go to patreon.com/thebookfair. Following is free. There are no posts locked behind a paid membership. Thank you very much for listening, and as always, I'll talk at you next time.